bestbookbits.com brings you the book summary of The Greatest Minds and Ideas of All Time by Durant. From the 100 best books to the 10 greatest thinkers to the 10 greatest poets, here is a concise collection of the world's most significant knowledge. For the better part of a century, Durant dwelled upon and wrote about the most significant eras, individuals, and achievements of human history. His selections have finally been brought together in a single compact volume. Durant eloquently defends his choices of the greatest minds and ideas, but he also stimulates readers into forming their own opinions, encouraging them to shed their surroundings and biases and enter the country of the mind, a timeless realm where the heroes of our species dwell. From a thinker who always chose to exalt the positives in human species, The Greatest Minds and Ideas of All Time stays true to Durant's optimism. This is a book containing the absolute best of a heritage passed on for the benefit of the future generations. Filled with Durant's renowned wit, knowledge, and unique ability to explain events and ideas in simple and exciting terms, this is a pocket-sized liberal arts and humanist curriculum in one volume. Before we jump into the book summary, we at Best Book Bits have done over 1,000 book summaries in video, written, and audio format. So check us out at bestbookbits.com. Follow us on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcast, and Apple Podcast. On with the summary. If a man is fortunate, he will, before he dies, gather up as much as he can of his civilized heritage and transmit it to his children. And to his final breath, he will be grateful for this inexhaustible legacy, knowing that it is our nourishing mother and our lasting life. Durant. Humor is akin to philosophy, for they are both viewpoints born of a large perspective of life. Chapter 1. A Shameless Worship of Heroes. Shameless. Our democratic dogma has leveled not only all voters but all leaders. We delight to show that living geniuses are only mediocrities, and that dead ones are myths. Since it is contrary to good manners to exalt ourselves, we achieve the same result by slightly indicating how inferior are the great men of the earth. For why should we stand reverent before waterfalls and mountain tops, or a summer moon on a quiet sea, and not before the highest miracle of all, a man who is both great and good? So many of us are mere talents, clever children in play of the life, that when genius stands in our presence, we can only bow down before it as an act of God, a continuance of creation. No, the real history of man is not in prices and wars, not in elections and battles, nor in even tenure of the common man. It is in the lasting contributions made by geniuses to the sum of human civilization and culture. And so with every country, so with the word, its history is probably the history of its great men. Therefore I see history not as a drudgery scene of politics and carnage, but as a struggle of man through genius, with the audience inerrant of matter and the baffling mystery of mind. The struggle to understand, control, and remake himself and the world. I see men standing on the edge of knowledge and holding the light a little further ahead. Here is a process of creation more vivid than in any myth, a godliness more real than in any creed. To contemplate such men, to insinuate ourselves through study into some modest discipleship to them, to watch them at their work and warm ourselves at the fire that consumes them. This is to recapture some of the thrill that youth gave us when we thought at the altar or in the confessional that we were touching or hearing God. Let us change the icons and light the candles again. Chapter 2. The 10 Greatest Thinkers. What is thought? It baffles description because it includes everything through which it might be defined. It is the most immediate fact that we know and the last mystery of our being. Thought and invention begun. The bewilderment of baffled instinct begot the first timid hypothesis, the first tentative putting together of 2 and 2, the first generalizations, the first painful studies of similarities of quality and regularities of sequence, the first adaptation of things learned to situations so novel that reductions instinctive and immediate broke down into utter failure. It was then that certain instincts of action evolved into modes of thought and instruments of intelligence. What had been watchful, waiting, or stalking a prey became attention. Fear and flight became caution and deliberation. Pugnacity and assault became curiosity and analysis. Manipulation became experiment. The animal stood up erect and became man. Slave still to 1,000 circumstances. timidly brave before countless perils, but in his precarious way, destined henceforth to be lord of the earth. If ideas do not determine history, inventions do, and inventions are determined by ideas. Certainly, it is desire, the relentlessness of our insatiable wants, that agitates us into thinking, but however motivated or inspired, it is thought that finds a way. Perhaps all history is a succession of inventions made by genius and turned into conventions by the people, a series of initiatives taken by adventurous leaders and spread among the masses of mankind by the wave of imitation. There is no doubt that at the beginning and the summit of every age, some heroic genius stands, the voice and index of his time, the inheritor and interpreter of the past, the guide and pioneer into the future. But as we face the task of selecting these persons of the drama, about whom the play revolves, a dozen difficulties daunt us. What shall be our test of greatness? How, in the roster of human genius, shall we know whom to orbit and whom to name? The criteria. Well, we shall be ruthless and dogmatic here, and though it break our hearts, we shall admit no hero to our list whose thought, however subtle or profound, has not had an enduring influence upon mankind. Number 1. Confucius. A pupil having asked him, should one return good for evil? Confucius replied, with what then will you recompense kindness? Return good for good, and for evil justice. He did not believe that all men were equal. It seemed to him that intelligence was not a universal gift. The greatest fortune of a people would be to keep ignorant persons from public office and secure their wisest men to rule them. Number 2. Plato. Why do we love Plato? Because Plato himself was a lover, because he was alive every minute of his life and never ceased to grow. Such a man can be forgiven for whatever errors he has made. How much of Plato's Socrates was Socrates, and how much of it was Plato? We shall probably never know. Let us take Plato as an implying both. Here is an immortality of the soul which makes almost insignificant the passing of the flesh. Number 3. Aristotle. Here is a circumnavigation of the globe such as no mind has accomplished since. Here every problem in science and philosophy has its consideration, its illumination, and a defensible solution. Here knowledge is brought together as though 1,000 spies and coordinated into a unified version of the world. Here the phraseology of philosophy is born, and today it is hardly possible to think without using the mintage of Aristotle's brain. Here are new sciences, found with almost casual ease, as if these supreme creations of the human intellect were but the recreations of a philosopher. Here is that biology appears, and the embryology and logic. Not that no man has ever thought of these matters before, but that none has controlled his thinking with patient observation, careful experiment, and systematic formulation and results. Barring astronomy and medicine, the history of science begins with the encyclopedic labours of this tireless Stagirite. 4. St. Thomas Aquinas. How long in theory was the second adolescence of the conscious European mind? What Dante did to the hopes and fears of the Catholic resistance, Aquinas did it for thought, unifying knowledge, interpreting it, and focusing it all upon the great problems of life and death. The world does not follow him now, preferring a doubting Thomas to a dogmatic one. 5. Copernicus. But to the medieval world, whose whole philosophy had rested on the neighbourly nearness of earth and God, on the constant moral solicitude of the deity for man, this new astrology was an artistic blasphemy, a ruthless blow that seemed to overthrow the Jacob's ladder which faith has built between angels and men. With him, modernity begins. With him, secularism begins. With him, makes its French Revolution against a faith immemorially enthroned, and man's commerce for long effort to rebuild with thought the shattered palace of his dreams. With the Copernican Revolution, man was compelled to become of age. 6. Sir Francis Bacon. Oh, the zest of those bright Renaissance days, when the poverty of 1,000 years was almost forgotten, and the labour of 1,000 years had made men richer and bolder, scornful of barriers and bonds. The man who rang the bell that called the wits together, who sent out a challenge to all, the lovers and servants of truth everywhere, to bind themselves together in a new order and ministry of science, who proclaimed the mission of thought as no vain scholastic dispute, no empty academic speculation, but the inductive inquiry into nature's laws, the resolute extension of the mastery of man over the conditions of his life. The man who mapped out, as with royal authority, the unconquered fields of research, pointed 100 sciences to their tasks, and foretold their unbelievable victories, who inspired the Royal Society of Great Britain and the Great Encyclopedia of France, who turned men from knowledge as a mediation to knowledge as remolding power, who despised worship and longed for control, who overthrew the Aristotelian logic of unobserved reason and turned the gaze of science to the self-revealing face of nature, who carried in his brave soul beyond any other man of that spacious age the full spirit and purpose of the modern mind. 7. Sir Isaac Newton. For it is to him who masters our minds by the force of truth, and not to those who enslave them by violence, that we owe our reverence. 8. Voltaire. But which of us is originally exempt in form? What idea can we conceive today that has not enjoyed in one garb or another a haughty antiquity of time? It is easier to be original in error than in truth, for every truth displaces 1,000 falsehoods. Voltaire, like Bacon, lightened his candle at every man's torch. It remains that he made the torch burn so brightly that it enlightened all mankind. Things came to him dull, and he made them radiant. Things came to him obscure, and he cleansed and scored them with clarity. Things came to him in useless scholastic dress, and he caught them in such a language that the whole world could understand and profit from them. Number 9. Immanuel Kant. For how can we know matter except through our senses? And what is it then for us but our idea of it? Matter as known to us is but a form of mind. It was Kant who laboured best to rescue the mind from matter. The world heard him gladly, for it felt that it could live by faith alone, and did not love a science that merely darkened its aspirations and destroyed its hopes. Apparently Kant had won the battle against materialism and atheism, and the world could hope again. And last, 10. Charles Darwin. And then Darwin came, and the war waged anew. It may well be for posterity his name will stand as a turning point in the intellectual development of our Western civilization. If Darwin was wrong, the world may forget him as it has almost forgotten Democritus and Anaxagoras. If he was right, men will have to date from 1859 the beginning of modern thought. For what did Darwin do but offer quietly and with a disarming humility a world picture totally different from that which had contented the mind of man before? Copernicus had reduced the earth to a speck among melting clouds. Darwin reduced man to an animal fighting for his transcendent mastery of the globe. Man was no longer the son of God, he was son of strife, and his wars made the fiercest brutes ashamed of their amateur cruelty. Chapter 3. The 10 Greatest Poets. What is your test of greatness in a poet? It is a story dilemma. No, let me not pretend to do more here than to reveal my prejudice. 1. Homer. It seems unimportant and irrelevant that the tale as Homer tells it is not true. It is so well invented, and so vicariously recounted that if the facts were different, so much the worse for facts. Beauty has its rights as well as truth. These ancient epics are not complex in art or thought. They were addressed to the ear, not to the mind, and to the people, not to the subtle lords. Today we lead intricate and often introverted lives, in which action, as the Greeks knew it, as a rare exception, found chiefly in the press and gathered from afar. Man is now an animal that stops and thinks. Therefore our literature is an analysis of the motives and thought. It is in mental conflict that we find the profoundest wars and the darkest tragedies. But in Homer's day, life was action. Number 2. David. No matter who wrote them or when, there they are, the Psalms. The profoundest lyrics in literature, so vivid with ecstasy that even those who doubt all dogmas feel in the blood of a strange response to the music still. It is true that they complain too much, that they echo or anticipate Job's wonder why the just should suffer so while the ruthless prosper, that they conceive the deity in a narrow and nationalistic sense, that they beg too pugnaciently for the punishment of our enemies, that they coax Jehovah with fulsome praise, reproach him for negligence. Never was religious feeling so powerfully or so beautifully expressed with language that remains, in English, a model of simplicity, clarity, and strength, and in Hebrew rings out in the full organ tones of majesty, with phrases that are a part of the currency of our speech. Out of the mouth of babies and sucklings, the apple of my eye, put not your trust in princes. 3. Euripides. He resolved the power of Shakespeare without his range and subtlety, but with a social passion that moves us as nothing in all modern drama can, except the dying Lear. 4. Lucretius. Here is a strange man. This Lucretius, obviously nervous and unstable, he is a dark pessimist who sees everywhere two self-cancelling movements: growth and decay, reproduction and destruction, Venus and Mars, life and death. All forms begin and have their end. Only atoms, space, and law remains. Birth is a prelude to corruption, and even this massive universe will thaw and flow back into the formlessness. 5. Lipo. Legend, unsatisfied with a common end for so extraordinary a soul, told how he was drowned in a river while attempting to embrace the water's reflection of the moon. 6. Dante. How slowly Europe recovered from her long nightmare of Roman degeneration and barbarian invasion. He could describe hell later because he went through every realm of it on earth, and if he painted paradise less vividly, it was for the lack of personal experience. Perhaps the poem which he now began to write saved him from the madness and suicide. Nothing so cleanses the dross of a man as the creation of beauty or the pursuit of truth, and if the two are merged into one with him, as they were with Dante, he must be purified. All hope abandon, ye who enters here. It would not have been medieval had it not been an allegory. Our human life is always a hell, says the poet, until wisdom, Virgil, purges us of evil desire, and love, Beatrice, lives us to the happiness and peace. People remarked that he was never known to smile. 7. William Shakespeare. Being asked why Shakespeare had written such plays, answered, one must eat, such is fame, a man should never read his reviewers, nor be too curious about the verdict of posterity. All things are with more spirit chaste than enjoyed. Love is never quite content. In its secret heart is a poisonous anxiety, a premonition of alienation and decay. Love, says Rosalind, is merely a madness, and I tell you, deserves a dark horse and a whip, as madmen do. He became through despair the greatest poet of all. What we like in him most is the madness and richness of his speech. His style is as if his life was full of energy, riot, colour, and excess. Nothing succeeds like excess. 8. John Keats. I have loved the principle of beauty in all things. Here lies one whose name is right in water. Number 9. Percy Bysshe Shelley. No one was ever more completely or exclusively a poet, but it exceeds all imagination to convince what would have been in the moral condition of the world if neither Dante, Petrarch, Boccaccio, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Calderon, Lord Bacon, nor Milton had ever existed, if Raphael and Michelangelo had never been born, if the Hebrew poetry had never been translated, if a revival of the study of Greek literature had never taken place, if no monuments of ancient sculpture had been handed down to us, and if the poetry of the religion of the ancient world had been extinguished together with its beliefs. Hearts of hearts. Number 10. Walt Whitman. He would incarnate his own rough country, his own dubious democracy, his own turbulent and growing time. What Homer had been to Greece, Virgil to Rome, Dante to Italy, Shakespeare to England, he was to be for America, because he dared to see in her, with all her faults, her material of song. The originality of Leaves of Grass, says a French critic, is perhaps the most absolute which has ever been the manifest in literature. Originality is first words, masculine adjectives, and nouns. Plain, blunt words, daringly raised from the streets and the fields to poetry. Originality of form, no rhymes, except in the occasional failures like Captain, my Captain. The vivid identification of himself with every soul in every experience. Chapter 4. The 100 Best Books for an Education. If I were rich, I would have many books, and I would pamper myself with bindings bright to the eye and the soft to touch, paper generously opaque, and type such as men designed with printing was very young. Let me have 7 hours a week, and I will make a scholar and philosopher out of you. In 4 years you shall be as educated as any new-fledged doctor of philosophy in the land. Remember that we are not making a list of absolutely best 100 books. No list merely of the masterpieces of the belles lettres. We are choosing those volumes that will do most to make a man educated. The start is half the deed. Read actively, not passively. Consider at every step whether what you read accords with your own experience and how far it may be applied to the guidance of your own life. But if you disagree with an author or are shocked by his heresies, read on nevertheless. Toleration of differences is one mark of a gentleman. Why is our list henceforth historically arranged? First, because it is so well to study history as it was lived and made. Life without music, as Nietzsche said, would be a mistake. And so the revolution comes after 1789. Aristocracy is guillotined, art and manners droop, truth replaces beauty, and science remakes the world nearer to its head's desire. Apparently beauty is born in suffering, and wisdom is the child of grief. The philosophers of our parent century were almost as unhappy as the composers. It's always easier to love the weak than the strong. The strong do not need our love, and instinctively we look for flaws in their irritating perfection. Every statue is a provocation. These are sad books, but at the time we reach the end of the list, we shall be strong enough to face the truth without anesthesia. Life is better than literature, friendship is sweeter than philosophy, and children reach into our hearts with a profounder music that comes from any symphony, but even so those living delights offer no derogation to the modest and secondary pleasures of our books. For these are friends who give us only their best, who never answer back, and always wait our call. When we have walked with them a while, and listen humbly to their speech, we shall be healed of our infirmities, and know the peace that comes from understanding. Chapter 5. The 10 Peaks of Human Progress. A sketch of a tableau of the progress of human spirit. Given 100 years of liberated knowledge and universal free education, he said, and all social problems will, at the close of the next century, have been solved. There is no limit to progress except the duration of the globe upon which we are placed. I have never ceased to marvel that a man so placed, driven to the very last stand of hope, with all his personal sacrifices of aristocratic privilege and fortune gone for nothing, with that great revolution upon which the youth of all Europe had pinned its hopes for a better world issuing in indiscriminate suspicion and terror, should instead of writing an epic of despondency and gloom, have written a paean to progress. Search through all ancient Greek and Latin literature, and you find no affirmatory belief in human progress. It is a relatively new idea for men to have and to hold. Progress, a definition. Let us provisionally define progress as increasing control of the environment by life, and let us mean by environment all circumstances that condition the coordination and realization of desire. Progress is the domination of chaos by mind and purpose, of matter by form and will. And in assessing epochs and nations, we must guard against loose thinking. We must not compare nations in their youth with nations in its mellowness of their cultural immaturity, and we must not compare the worst or the best of one age with the selected best or worst of all the collected past. Each age and place calls for and needs certain brands of geniuses rather than others. These stars did not all shine on the same night. Our problem is whether the total and average level of human ability has increased and stands at its peak today. Under the complex strain of city life, we sometimes take imaginative refuge in the quiet simplicity of savage days. But in our less romantic moments, we know that this is a flight reaction from our actual tasks, that this idolatry of barbarism, like so many of our young opinions, is merely an impatient expression of adolescent manipulation, part of the suffering involved in the contemporary retardation of individual maturity. A study of such savage tribes as survive shows their high rates of infantile mortality, their short tenure of life, their inferior speed and their inferior stamina, their inferior will, and their superior plagues. The savage, however, might turn their argument around and inquire how we enjoy our politics and our wars, and whether we think ourselves happier than the tribes whose weird names resound in textbooks of anthropology. The believer in progress will have to admit that we have made too many advances in the art of war, and that our politicians, with startling exemptions, would have adorned the Roman Forum in the days of Milo and Clytus. As to the happiness, no man can say it is an elusive angel. Presumably, It defends first upon health, secondly upon love, and thirdly upon wealth. As to wealth, we make such progress that it lies on the conscience of our intellectuals. As to love, we try to atone for our lack of depth by unprecedented inventiveness and variety. Our thousand fades of diet and drugs predispose us to the belief that we must be riddled with disease as compared with simpler men in simpler days. But this is a delusion. We think that there were so many doctors, there must be more sickness than before. But in truth, we have not more ailments than in the past, but only more money. Our wealth allows us to treat and cherish and master illnesses, from which primitive men died without even knowing their Greek names. The outline of history. Certain great moments stand out as the peaks and essence of human history. Certain advances, which ones made, were never lost. Number 1. Speech. The slow development of articulate expression. 2. Fire. Fire made man independent of climate, gave him a greater compass on the earth, tempered his tools to hardness and durability, and offered him as food 1,000 things inedible before. Not least at all, it made him master of the night. 3. The conquest of animals. There was a time when man was hunted as well as hunter, when every step from cave or hut was an adventure, and the possession of earth was still at stake. 4. Agriculture. For civilization came through 2 things, chiefly the home which developed those special dispositions that form the psychological cement of society, and agriculture, which took man from his wandering life as a hunter, herder, and killer, and settled him long enough in one place to let him build homes, schools, churches, colleges, universities, civilization. But it was woman who gave man agriculture and the home. She domesticated man as she domesticated the sheep and the pig. Man is a woman's last domestic animal, and perhaps he is the last creature that will be civilized by woman. The task is just begun. One look at our menus reveals us still in the hunting stage. 5. Social organization. Here are 2 men disputing. One knocks the other down, kills him, and then concludes that he is alive must have been right, and that he is dead must have been wrong. A mode of demonstration still accepted in international disputes. Here are 2 other men disputing. One says to the other, "Let us not fight. We may both be killed. Let us take our differences to some elder of the tribe and submit to his decision." It was a crucial moment in human history, for if the answer was no, barbarism continued, and if it was yes, civilization planted another root in its memory of man, the replacement of chaos with order, of brutality with judgment, of violence with law. 6. Morality. Here we touch the very heart of our problem. Are men morally better than they were? So far as intelligence in an element in morals, we have improved. The average of intelligence is higher, and there has been a great increase in the number of what we may vaguely call developed minds. So far as characters is concerned, we have probably retrogressed. Subtlety of thought has grown at the expense of stability of soul. We are slightly gentler species than we were, capable of greater kindness. We think there is more violence in the world than before, but in truth, there are only more newspapers. There is less brutality between men and women, between parents and children, between teachers and pupils, than in any recorded generation of the past. The emancipation of women and her ascendancy over man indicate an unprecedented gentility in the once murderous male. Love, which was unknown to primitive men, or was only a hunger in the flesh, has flowered into a magnificent garden of song and sentiment, in which the passion of a man for a maid, through vigorously rooted in physical need, rises like incense into the realm of living poetry. 7. Tools. These multiplying inventions are the new organs with which we control our environment. The aeroplane has its highest means for us, long chained like Prometheus to the earth. We have freed ourselves at last, and now we may look the eagle in the face. The menial labor that degraded both master and man is lifted from the human shoulders and harnessed to the tireless muscles of iron and steel. Soon every waterfall and every wind will pour its beneficent energies into factories and homes, and man will be freed from the tasks of the mind. It is not revolution, but invention that will liberate the slave. 8. Science. We progress only in knowledge And those other gifts are rooted in the slow enlightenment of the mind. Already in our day, man is turning round from the remade environment and beginning to remake himself. 9. Education. More and more completely we pass on to the next generation the gathered experience of the past. We have not excelled the selected geniuses of antiquity, but we have raised the level and the average of human knowledge far beyond any age in history. In the presence of history, the great experiment of education is just begun. What will the fruitage of education be when every one of us is schooled till 20 and finds equal access to the intellectual treasures of the race? Adolescence lengthens, we begin more helplessly, and we grow more completely toward that higher man who struggles to be born out of the darkened soul. We are the raw material of civilization. Consider it not as the painful accumulation of facts and dates, but as an ennobling intimacy with great men. Consider it not as the preparation of the individual to make a living, but as a development of every potential capacity in him for the comprehension, control, and appreciation of his world. Above all, consider it in its fullest definition as the technique of transmitting as completely as possible to as many as possible that technological, intellectual, moral, and artistic heritage through which the race forms the growing individual and makes him human. Education is the reason why we behave like human beings. We are hardly born human. We are born ridiculous and malodorous animals. We become human. We have humanity thrust upon us through the 100 channels whereby the past pours down into the present, that mental and cultural inheritance, whose preservation, accumulation, and transmission place mankind today, with all of its defectives and illiterates, on a higher plane than any generation has ever reached before. 10. Writing and print. If one generation forgot or misunderstood, the weary ladder of knowledge has to be climbed anew. It created the country of the mind in which, because of writing, genius need not die. And now, as writing united the generations, print, despite the 1,000 prostitutions of it, can bind the civilizations and accumulation of technical knowledge and cultural creation. Nothing but beauty and wisdom deserve immortality. We need not fret then about the future. Never was our heritage of civilization and culture so secure, and never was it half so rich. We may do our little share to augment it and transmit it, confident that time will wear away chiefly the dross of it, and that what is finally fair and worthy in it will be preserved to illuminate many generations. Chapter 6. 12 Vital Dates in World History. The inclusion of dates in the text would make the story as accurate and dull as a good encyclopedia. That the transformation of dead data into living narrative would require some other disposition of dates than one would infest with them every page of the table. I should hardly be contented to have my pupils know only 12 dates, and I presume that the choice of the baker's number would not suggest an optimum, but rather a minimum. If, however, one is condemned to live on a mental desert island, number 1, 4241 BC, the introduction of the Egyptian calendar. The implications of that calendar are endless. Development of astronomy and mathematics. It divided the year into 12 months and 30 days each, with 5 intercalary days at the end of the rostering. 2. 543 BC, the death of Buddha. No other soul, I suppose, has ever been so influential. In truth, Buddhism does not follow Buddha, but Buddha means India. For the spirit of India lies in religion rather than in science, in contemplation rather than in action, in the fraternal greatness rather than in the application of mathematics to artillery, or of chemistry to bombs. Life, said Buddha, is full of suffering. It can be made bearable only by doing no injury to any living thing, and speaking no evil of any man or woman either. 3. 478 BC, the death of Confucius. Never has one man so written his name upon the face of spirit of the people as Confucius has done in China. 4. 399 BC, the death of Socrates. When for the first time a whole civilization liberated itself from superstition and created science, drama, democracy, and liberty, and passed on to Rome and Europe half of the intellectual and artistic heritage. 5. 44 BC, the death of Caesar. The death of Caesar stands as the door to the golden age of Rome. 6. BC, the death of Christ. This date the reader may place ad lib, since no man knows it. For us is the most important date of all, because it divides all history in the West, gives us the greatest hero and model, provides us with the body of myth and legend, which is now passion from the theological to the literary stage, and marks the beginning of the Christian age, which seems today to be approaching its close. After us, the deluge. God knows what a mess of occult faiths will in the present century replace the tender and cruel theologies that praised and dishonored Christ. 7. AD 632, the death of Muhammad. There is no surety that the future is not theirs. 8. 1294, the death of Roger Bacon. This date is almost as good as any other to mark the first use of gunpowder. It was Roger Bacon who first definitely described the explosion that would revolutionize the world and offer to all pious statesmen a substitute for birth control. Perhaps this is the most important date in the story of the fall of man, though some cynic might argue that a still more tragic event was the invention of thinking, the liberation of intellect from instinct, the consequent separation of sex from reproduction, and the abandonment of the perpetuation of the race to the selected morons of every land. 9. 1454, the press of Jonas Gutenberg at Mainz on the Rhinos issues the first printed document bearing a printed date. One hardly knows today whether printing does more harm than good, or whether the growth of knowledge and learning has not weakened character as much as it has stocked the mind. But let us try a little further. 10. 1492, Columbus discovers America. 11. 1769, James Watt begins the steam engine to practical utility. This event inaugurated the Industrial Revolution. It was Watt's stone that capped the arch and changed the world. It transformed society and government by empowering the owners of machinery and the controllers of commerce beyond the owners of titles and land. It transformed religion by generating science and its pervasive miracles and inducing many men to think in terms of cause and effect and machines. It transformed the mind to substituting novel and varied stimuli, necessitating thought for the old, ancestral and domestic situations to which instinct had been adopted and sufficient. It transformed women by taking her work from home and forcing her into factories to recapture it. It transformed morals by complicating economic life, postponing marriage, multiplying contacts and opportunities, liberating women, reducing the family and weakening religious and parental authority and control. And it transformed art by subordinating beauty to use and subjecting the artist not to a favored few, but inherited standards of judgment and trained taste, but to a multitude who judged all things in terms of power and cost and size. All this and more, capitalism, socialism, the imperialism that must come with industrialized nations, need foreign markets and foreign food, the wars that must come from these markets, and the revolutions that must come from these wars. 76 9 standards from the whole modern age. And 12. 1789, the French Revolution. The political signature to economic and psychological facts that have accumulated for centuries, that humanity is an interlude in biology, biology an interlude in geology, and geology an interlude in astronomy. All in all, I consider it the peak of human history, greater than the Periclean Greece, or Augustine Rome, or Medicinian Italy. Never had men thought so bravely, spoken so brilliantly, or lifted themselves to a greater height of culture and courtesy. Yes, they had destroyed once France, but they had liberated another, not to speak of freeing America, through their disciplines, Washington, Franklin, and Jefferson. We are all born within frontiers of space and time, and struggle as we will never escape from our boxes. And that's a wrap on this book, The Greatest Minds and Ideas of All Time. If you like this summary, click the link to download this. We at Best Book Bits have done over 1,000 summaries in video, written, and audio format. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, and the website bestbookbits.com. If you want to help support this channel, we've put together our top 450 best book bit summaries in one massive downloadable PDF and MP3. Take it offline, read and listen anywhere you like. Thank you again for watching and listening. Have yourself an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye now.